And welcome back. Now, of course, here at the Big Five Digital Festival, we bring you up to date with what's going on in the construction industry. And we're so happy we've been able to bring you lots of news about design, about new ideas in architecture, about what's really driving this industry. We're very excited now to be looking at sustainability reset and really looking at how architecture can help to overcome the climate crisis. And joining us now is the Principal and Regional Leader of Science and Technology with HOK. He is also the chair of RIBA's Sustainable Futures Group. So I'm absolutely delighted to hand over now to Gary Clark. Gary, over to you.
Welcome, and thank you for joining me. My talk is on the RIBA Sustainable Guidance and our 2030 Challenge. I'm going to touch on the RIBA guidance and then actually the post-COVID future and give a few examples of the process and some examples of how some practices have achieved the 2030 Challenge in the UK. We note the first slide, the planet. There's 7.7 billion people and rising. For the end of this talk, there's going to be another 20,000 people added to that population. And we can see a very thin atmosphere that protects us from the coldness of space. For tens of thousands of years, humans have actually inhabited all parts of the globe, and they've done that through working with natural context, natural materials, and the skill of modifying their environmental conditions with some basic vernacular design. We've got black houses in Scotland using local materials. We've then got Italian sort of courtyards or atriums, again protecting from the heat of the summer sun. And we've got wind catchers of Pakistan and the Middle East, and then through into very lightweight structures within hot, humid climates in Indonesia. That all changed once the invention of air conditioning. And we can see here, this is early Corbusier in 1929, City to Refuge in Paris. We see a sealed glazed facade, it's concrete, single glazed, and this was only possible to make this habitable because of air conditioning. However, over the years, the organization that ran this, they couldn't afford their heating bills and cooling, like electricity. It was too hot in summer and too cold in winter. And effectively, they had to kind of redo this building. So they invited Corbusier back in 1952 to do actually a retrofit. This is their first probably sustainable retrofit. And what he did is he created a natural ventilated approach, mixed mode. You can see here sort of external shading devices, and again, it was all tuned to the orientation of the building. And this helped the building to mitigate its environmental conditions with actually a sensible kind of sort of reliance on electricity and air conditioning. So that lesson, I don't think has actually been learnt by our profession. And we can see here, this is an image of London, and we can see the iconic sort of Shard. I think this is the sun setting on this future. We can't really build sealed buildings of this complexity and this amount of glass in the future for many reasons. First one is that future that we built accounts for a third of all the energy and carbon emissions used in the planet, 40% in the UK, and that was 37 billion tonnes in 2018. The Earth, at its best, can only absorb half that amount, so we've got to get below that amount. At the same time, we're cutting forests down at an unprecedented level. This is the size of the UK every year, and this is an image, latest image of the Amazon forest. The result of that, really combination of how we live, and again, the roots of COVID, obviously in terms of disturbing sort of deep, jungles and forests, again, is yet to be established, but this is the result of that disturbance. This is the grim total, which reached over 1 million just a week ago throughout the planet. So these big problems require big global solutions. And we reached that tipping point as well. This year is really absolutely critical. This is last chance saloon for us to really sort of change what's happening. We've got two futures ahead of us. The map on the right is the future if we do nothing. And we can see there that's the temperature changes of between 4 and 8 degrees centigrade, and it's about 8 to 14 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we've got a future on the left, which is if we try and reduce carbon emissions by 2% per year for the next 30 years, we can maybe stabilize at 2 degrees centigrade increase, or we actually go faster, and it's 7.6% per year for the next 10 years. And we're on track for round about that this year because of the COVID lockdown globally. So that's the two futures. We've got to do something about it now, and the next 10 years is critical. That is the last chance saloon. So what do we do? This is a graph of COVID right at the beginning of our lockdown in the UK. And we see there, if we took no action, then our NHS capacity, National Health Service, would have been swamped, and then that would have uncontrolled peak. We then flattened the curve, and we did that successfully first time round. We're now entering our second wave. And the same principles really match with climate change. If we take no action, then we're going to burst through Earth's capacity, and I would believe that we're actually beyond that now in terms of the cycle. And we've got to work hard to reduce carbon emissions, flatten the curve underneath Earth's capacity to absorb what we do in the next 10 years is absolutely critical. We can see that in the graph. I've been very privileged to chair the RIBA Sustainable Futures Group for the last couple of years, and at that time we've rewritten all the kind of core guidance of sustainability for the RIBA. So I'm going to touch on these guides. First one is the RIBA Sustainable Outcomes Guide, then moving into the RIBA 2030 Climate Challenge, and then how that's all embedded into the new Plan of Work 2020. All the guides link back to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, all 17, but what we focused on this is 10 which actually we think we can measure and manage on site at project level, and it's for busy design teams and architects that we need to have ready reckoning metrics to then match that, and we can manage that within a project level. These all kind of come down to 8 sustainable outcomes. So just very quickly, top is operational energy measured in kilowatt hours. Then we've got embodied energy, which is kilograms CO2, together their whole life carbon. We then look at sustainable water cycle, and that's litres per person per day. Sustainable conductivity in transport, and again, it's reducing the reliance on commuting, and that's obviously all this remote presentation is actually working well. Then we've got sustainable land use and ecology. What we ask is design teams in the UK to leave a site with more biodiversity than when they get it, and 10% minimum net gain, if not 20%. Good health and well-being, which we'll touch on that in a minute. Sustainable communities and social value, recognizing that what we do has actually significant value beyond just the bricks and mortar. We've got to think about that wider community benefits. And then finally, we've got to look at the whole sustainable life cycle cost. So those 8 outcomes are then your beginning point with your design teams. That's where we'd, that's already recognized, about 25 to 30 metrics embedded in those outcomes. And then you work with your client to define those in stage 0 and 1. And then you integrate those into the early kind of concept. And that first few months of concept design is absolutely critical. You either win or lose the sustainable battle at that point. You can't bolt on sustainability. It's got to be embedded right at the heart of the design. We then develop the design through stages 3 and 4, hand over to the contractor in stage 5, and that's where we flip to validation and dissemination. So we really got to look at reality checking what's happening and making sure that we hand over that operational plan to the client and users. And then at the end of stage 6, we're asking for a post-occupancy evaluation, which we'll come on to that in a minute. Here we go. So what we're saying is part of this is a graduated post-occupancy evaluation. At the end of 12 months defects, we ask for a light touch review, and that's a walk around and so forth, user survey. If there's something quite not right and you think there's a further fine tuning, this would be a separate contract. You could go back in at year 2 with your engineers and architects together with the users, and then do a little bit more research in terms of what's happening within the building. And then finally, a detailed forensic investigation in year 3. So this is a classic 3-year detailed post-occupancy evaluation. But we've got to close the feedback loop. This is how we've got to do this going forward. The 2030 challenge has really set a fairly stringent goal. If we do nothing, we can see on the top there, it's going to be +4 degrees. The government in the UK have set a legally binding target of 2050. We can see that on the bottom scale. And then I've been gradually plotting on the different governments and bodies and how they've actually tracking through when they're going to hit net zero. For the RIBA, we've set 2030 as that target just now, and that's hopefully, basically what we're saying is any new building or deep retrofit project has got to be net zero by the end of 2030. If you can go faster, then really encourage everybody to do that. And the reason for that is we've got to really deal with the elephant in the room, which is the existing building stock. We've got 27 million homes and total 45 million existing buildings in the UK. Most of them are actually underperforming and adding to our 40% of our carbon emissions. So we've got to have a planned retrofit for the entire existing building estate in the UK. And obviously that we've got 30 years to do that. So RIBA and lots of leading developers are signing up to this 2030, which is absolutely fantastic. Leading councils as well. Many have declared an emergency and set 2030 as their target. Interestingly, a big global business there, AstraZeneca, has said that they're going to be net zero by 2025 for their entire global operations. And that's the way it's going. So really, if you're at the leading edge of this and you want to be in leading in terms of the construction sector, then that's the plan. Moving into the targets, I'm not going to go into all the detail here, but really what we ask is there's 4 metrics or 4 outcomes from that, sustainable outcomes that we focus on. And what we've done is we've taken current benchmarks in the UK, we can see in the pink, and then we apply a 20%, a 50% and a 75% reduction on operational energy along the top. And that's where you get those figures. Now, if you're in different countries, you can actually use your benchmarks from your own country, and then you just apply that same principle. Now, the principle really is trying to get that 75%. Now, that aligns with similar to the AIA 2030 commitment. And what we're saying really is the challenge is trying to do the bulk of the carbon reduction by the envelope and the building on site itself before you're allowed to offset using decarbonised renewables or planting forests. We think that's kind of fair balance. Embodied carbon, slightly different metrics there. We see that's 1,000 kilogram for the average house back in the day, but really new housing is about 600. So we've asked for a 50% reduction on that by 2030. Potable water use in UK is still an issue, obviously in the south of England, and it's 125 litres per person is the current benchmark, and we're asking for a 40% reduction. Now that would include rainwater harvesting and reuse, so we'll come back to that in a minute. And no matter what you do, we've got to hit good health well-being metrics, and that's indoor air quality over in terms of temperature and also daylighting, and that is absolutely critical in a post-COVID world. These are slightly different ones for non-domestic, see different benchmarks, but broadly the same principles again in terms of percentage reduction. So the magic number is a DECA rating in the UK, which is a display energy certificate. It's operational energy, so this is everything in the building, and we're looking at a target of 55 kilowatt hours per square metre, which is really challenging, we know that. Embodied carbon 50% overall. Water use, you can see again 40% reduction, and the health metrics are the same. So where does that come in terms of current benchmarks? Now this is CPD in the UK, kindly sort of gave me this slide, and we see there the blue kind of sort of angled line is really the profile of non-domestic government offices, and we can see some are actually quite low and some are high. So there's a kind of spread coming from about 100 kilowatt hours up to 400 kilowatt hours per square metre. The average really CPD have estimated is 225 kilowatt hours per square metre. That's our benchmark. And we can see coming down there to the right hand side, we've got 2025 targets, which is 50% reduction, and then the 75% in terms of 2030. And we align with LETI and UKGBC as well. So the red line at the bottom, that 55 kilowatt hours is our target in the UK. That target obviously will be different in different countries, but that's really where we need to be. And there's one building that has actually hit that consistently in terms of it's close to it, but if it had a heat pump, then it would consistently hit that. So we'll come on to that in a minute. So picking up the different key metrics or key outcomes. Net zero operational carbon, there's no shortage of energy of hitting the planet. The sun provides 1 kilowatt per square metre for half the planet a day. The problem is trying to capture it and store it. So what we do in terms of the principles is first thing is we've got to retrofit first. So in the UK, we've got to look at our existing building stock, and we've got to do that before we actually build new buildings. First principle, really after that, if you've got to build new, is a fabric first approach. And what I mean is really looking to really increase the U values, air tightness and so forth of the fabric of the building. That's where the bulk of the savings will come from. Then when you do that, then you think about regenerative engineering in terms of thermal recovery, ground source heat pumps or air source heat pumps, and then smart controls in terms of shutting off when nobody's in the building or in the room and so forth. Then we're looking about how we integrate on-site renewables. PV obviously is an obvious choice there, and then before you then offset with off-site renewables to achieve your net zero. Next one is net zero embodied carbon. The image here is a shrine in Japan. Now, this is kind of highlighting back to our vernacular discussion. It's using materials round about the forest for the trees, the stone from the local quarries, and then the interesting bit here is a lot of the shrines are rebuilt every 20 years as part of their culture and spiritual renewal, and that principle has got the same. We've got to do that as part of the circular economy. It's about the design for disassembly and reuse of our buildings. So the principles really are retrofit first. Again, same thing. You've got to look at existing buildings first. Then we've got to carry out a whole life carbon analysis of the materials we use to make sure that they're going to hit that target. And the principle really is using local, low embodied materials as far as possible and thinking about healthy and ethical materials at the same time. And then when you do that, then obviously you've got to offset with renewables. Next one is sustainable water cycle litres per person. And really, we've got to do more than what we do now. And I think there's basic specifications in terms of low flow appliances and leak detection. That's a standard. We've got to go beyond that. And even in the UK, and I think this is a principle for around the planet, is we've got to capture more rainwater. And we've got to do it to help the infrastructure that are there already. And if we do all that with every project we do, and we're talking about seasonal storage, we're going to capture it when it rains, the rainy season, and keep it on our site for that few months, and then we can reuse that. Absolutely critical. That will help the drainage infrastructure as well, take the pressure off flash floods as well. So again, we've got to all do our bit, and I would urge every design team to add that rainwater recycling into their buildings. This is obviously very topical, good health and well-being. And the principles really are, and it really is critical in terms of this kind of COVID situation just now. The principles are so obvious, and it's not rocket science here. Contact outside and contact with nature is so important, and we can see that down in lockdown. And we've got to think about the density, and obviously going back to work just now, the density is absolutely critical. I think we've increased the density too much in some of our buildings, and obviously the cross-contamination is actually quite high in that one. Indoor air quality, absolutely key. For me, I'm not an advocate for sealed buildings and turning up the air conditioning. We've got to think about that long term and think about that contact to outside, and it's natural ventilation, it's opening windows and vents is for me the principle there. Good daylighting, adaptive thermal comfort measures rather than actually trying to create a sealed box and keep a constant temperature. Good acoustics, and obviously inclusive design is part of that. So all our targets are, and all the kind of guides linked together with the UKGBC and LETI. We work closely in the background to make sure that we align in terms of definitions and actually metrics and targets. So just absolutely clear about definitions. So this is the definition we're using from the UKGBC for net zero carbon. It's about the operational carbon in the grey in the middle. It's a building energy use minus renewables, and you've got to offset. And then the whole life carbon is then adding construction and the in-use embodied carbon of replacement and maintenance. And that's where you get the whole life building carbon. Breaking that down, we can see this is the splits in the UK. On one side, we can see how it's all related in terms of embodied carbon. To the left side, the majority of that is in the sub and superstructure. So structural engineers are absolutely critical to achieve this. And on the other side, we can see the range of in-use operational breakdown. Heating and cooling is one of the key ones, especially in domestic situation in the UK. But the unregulated energy use is absolutely critical. You can see there 45%, and that's for an average office. That is where the future really needs to look at reducing that down. Going into the split there, we can see regulated and unregulated energy use. What we're saying in the UK is to ditch our current energy performance certificate, we can see on the right there, and we need to move to a display energy certificate, which includes regulated and unregulated energy use in buildings. There's a few tools that we can use to do that one, ranging from pure accuracy to good accuracy. And what we're advising really is, lobbying for this, is to ditch the current regulations and to move to a more kind of sort of design for performance tool, and we see there passive house is that borderline. That's where we really want to passive house as one method where we can do an alternate route, and the very good track record of achieving those targets. Going into non-domestic buildings, we've got the CPD TM54 tool, which is really good, and then coming out of Australia in terms of neighbours, there's a new design performance tool, which is the Better Building Partnership that are developing that, and use the benchmarks to then set that target. So in terms of can we do it and what do we need to do? So this is a small project. This is in the Netherlands. It's Energy Sprong. And they're doing some developments in Nottingham in the UK. And really what this is a net zero refurbishment of existing homes. We can see the home there before in terms of the right, and we see the one in the middle is when it's retrofitted. That's net zero, and that's really the future. That is what we've got to do for our entire building stock in the UK, and I would advise any country have really got to look at this as well seriously to achieve that carbon emissions. We've got to do the same at a larger scale. This is a scheme from Bennetts Associates about 10 years ago, where they refurbished a 1960s office building and then created a naturally ventilated building, a very good health and well-being approach, really good indoor air quality. And they achieved, this is actually measured data, a 44% reduction on that. But I think we can go beyond that in terms of that. That's with minimal renewables as well. Coming back to new building, if you've got to do new buildings, then this is a good example. This is Mikkel Richies, and I was lucky to be a judge last year on the Sterling Prize, RIBA's Premier Award, and this was a clear winner. From our perspective, it's a net zero passive house development for about 100, 150 families, and we can see there it's achieved our 2030 challenge right away. So again, it was an obvious and worthy winner of that, and it's changed people's lives as well here. This is a communities that have struggled, and the families come in here and they've been lifted out of fuel poverty at the same time. We're talking only about 50 to 100 pounds a year for all their energy costs, and this doesn't have significant renewables on it. If we add renewables to a passive house base build, that's a passive house plus. This is a house by Justin Beer Architects. And the combination we can see actually creates a net positive building. So the energy which is stored, that actually is charging the electric car that the owner uses. Now this is the blueprint for the future. This is what we've got to do, and we're going to do it at scale for all our housing in the UK. This is a slightly larger scale. This is Alison Morrison, and it's a very sensitive college accommodation in Cambridge. And we can see there it's not shouting out in terms of sustainability. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but it's just really sensibly designed, good window proportions. We can see the shading on there, orientation, and then the PVs are integrated into a kind of sloping south roof. And together that achieved our 2030 target almost in terms of 70% reduction. We can see there 63 kilowatt hours per square metre, and that was before any offsetting by the college. Moving up a scale, this is the Enterprise Centre by Archetype, again in Norwich, fantastic building, and this is the one that is actually consistently been the best performing university building in the UK for many years. And we can see it's averaging about 70 kilowatt hours per square metre. Now that there were some problems with heat pumps. If the heat pumps were working and developed, then that would be below our 2030 challenge of 55, and that's excluding again significant renewables on the site. So for me, this is it. This is where we can see in terms of the two schemes, in terms of Goldsmith Street and this one, we can do it, and we can do it at cost. We can see here that it's built at the medium cost of university, no additional cost, and the same with Goldsmith Street is that was £180 per square foot in the UK, which is actually good value. Moving up a scale, this is a library in Worcester by Field and Clyde Bradley, and we see there very good performance, 88 kilowatt hours per square metre. It's a 60% reduction, again with some limited renewables, but not much. So again, we've got good scope to do further. And the final project I was just going to give you is Everyman. This won Sterling Prize many years ago, and this is a very complex building type. So it's a theatre. Generally, it's very heavily serviced, and then the target really normally is the benchmark is about 600 kilowatt hours per square metre. This has actually been measured below 200, which is nearly a 70% reduction on that. And then the really kind of come around here is the principle is that we can do both. We can create beautiful buildings, award-winning buildings that actually perform well as well. And that is the future. That is what we must all do and aspire to. So just a few takeaways from this talk. First one is assist your existing building clients to carry out post-occupancy evaluation. Up to 20% energy saving could be done by that if we go back in. And not only that, it's good actually business relationship as well. We're going to target net zero whole life carbon, and we're going to prioritize deep retrofit as a priority before you think about new buildings. If you're going to build new, then you target a decade rating for non-domestic buildings in the UK. It's equivalent throughout the world, and target passive house performance for domestic buildings. Finally, we've got to think about targeting that 40% reduction or higher. And again, it's rainwater is absolutely critical on this one in terms of storage and reuse. Target health and well-being in terms of the well-building standards, a very good starting point, and that is absolutely critical in this post-COVID world. Then final two is then target significantly enhanced biodiversity. And remember, we're losing 50% of our biodiversity in the planet as we speak. That is the other emergency. We've got to deliver that, and actually, in terms of construction team and architects, we have got to lead that. And finally, if you're in UK or even anywhere in the world, we'd really urge you to sign up to 2030 Challenge. Thanks very much.
And Gary, thank you so much. Thanks so much for being here really and looking at that, how architecture can actually do its bit to overcome the climate crisis. And I just loved your checklist there with all of the great things that are being done, that have to be done, and that we all need to pay attention. So Gary, thanks for joining me for this Q&A session.
Thanks very much.
Now let's just have a look at the challenge, the RIBA Challenge 2030. There's a lot in that challenge, and it is 2020, and at the end of 2020. So you've got to put the skates on and sort of move forward to make sure that everybody comes with you in terms of meeting that challenge. Really getting buildings to net zero. Okay, I can see in the UK, but there are millions of homes, millions of buildings, mixed use buildings, all of that. Can it be achieved? And maybe just bring us up to date, perhaps, in what really needs to be, I suppose, escalated to make sure we get there.
Yeah, so thanks very much. It's a 2030 challenge to specifically for new and deep retrofit buildings. But the elephant in the room in the UK and elsewhere in the world is actually our existing building stock is generally poorly performing, and that is actually contributing to a third. And in the UK, it's 40% of our our carbon emissions are related to our existing building stock. Particularly, Britain has actually got the I think the worst building stock in Europe. So there's a lot of action going on in the background. The UK government have pledged 8 billion so far. We're hoping for more major announcements. In terms of the funding, we've had many meetings with our major lenders in the UK, building societies and also pension funds. And then they see a route this is a steady future in terms of reinvesting in our sustainable future. So the money is there. The trillion is going to cost £1 trillion to retrofit our 27 million homes, and it's 45 million existing buildings in the UK. Now the aim is to sort of take this down to reduce the energy demand by about 50%, and this is through basic information, basic strategies in terms of making sure that things are insulated properly, and its air tightness is critical. And that's, I think, the same for the Middle East as well. So it works both ways. Then you work in terms of getting fossil fuels out of buildings, and there's a big program to basically remove all our gas infrastructure in terms of boilers and converting into heat pumps. And we've got a lot of potential there. Again, similar thing in the Middle East as well. And then you basically then don't go as far as that. So maybe there's a PV integration. But what you do is then at the same time as energy reduction demand, then you've got to then decarbonize your grid, and the UK is doing quite well on that. So we're charging in all cylinders on that, and that was a major announcement with Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, last week. In Scotland, where I am just now, we're actually hitting 80% renewables per year, and we should be in terms of 100% renewable energy in the next few years. So effectively, that is a strategy. You've got to do both, as well as energy reduction demand in terms of basic refurbishment, and at the same time as decarbonize your grid. Yeah, indeed. And I suppose it's about efficiency of energy too. I mean, I remember growing up in very cold houses, but with great blaring fires on it. But you'd spend your life sitting around the fire, because if you went anywhere else, it was freezing. Yes, exactly. I remember those days. Countryside, indeed. So totally inefficient use of how we did it in terms of, I guess, yes,
all the heat was going out the windows and various other cracks in the buildings.
Yeah, I think it's if you just think in terms of wherever the viewers are just now, if you're in hot countries, then it's the complete opposite of that. It's basically keeping the cool thin, and it's all about sort of insulation, air tightness to keep that cool, that precious cool in the buildings. So it's exactly the same principles.
And I think we're seeing that in the design of buildings, which is so exciting now in terms of making sure, that the walkways between them sometimes are shaded and various things like that. And we have some great examples of buildings like that in the region as well. And I suppose that in terms of, I suppose the responsibility on architects right now, when you're in, you have to adapt to where you're building. You can't do the same building for here as the one you might do in Scotland, even if it looks the same. It has to be actually designed very differently in many ways.
I think that's hopefully my first few slides really highlighted that we've really got to sort of follow our vernacular principles of architecture, right? We've got a history of 5,000-10,000 years of architecture, and unfortunately, we're this international style of glazed high-rise buildings, put in different sort of climates. We've got to get beyond that. That is the problem. So we must go back to a more vernacular, nuanced approach. And for me, that actually creates better architecture, more contextual architecture. And then the history of the Middle Eastern architecture, I'm a big fan of that and really studied it in great detail. So I think there's a fantastic sort of opportunity there to create more culturally relevant buildings, meaningful, and actually help save the planet at the same time.
And of course, when you're talking about it, you really put it into perspective in terms of it's about energy, it's about water, it's about space, it's about outdoor space, indoor space, it's about hot, it's about heat and cool. It really is. It's a hugely holistic approach, not just about here's a good looking building and it ticks a few other boxes. There's so much that really has to be taken into account to make sure that we're getting, I suppose, that we might never get the perfect building, but the near optimal building for sure.
Yeah, and hopefully that's the outcomes approach is giving you that idea of just a core set of metrics. We're all very busy in terms of constructing. The projects are all fast paced, so that's a kind of ready reckoner that I think we boiled it down to about 20 to 30 metrics that a design team really needs to kind of focus on, and that is eminently achievable for big in terms of construction projects. And if you meet those and then some are interlinked, then you're doing well. But ultimately the goal is we've got to look for that net zero carbon, whole life carbon sort of target. That's really it's a non-negotiable. We must achieve that.
Now, talk to me about offsets, because sometimes when I hear of the great plans that are in place and people committing, we're doing X, Y, Z, but this much will be offset. I mean, is it just sort of kicking the can down the road a bit because somebody's going to have to sort that out one day? What's your take on that?
Okay, so I think it's a bit of a nuanced approach here. So I think, in the talk there, I highlighted that our RIBA 2030 challenge that was inspired by the AIA 2030 challenge, our commitment. And we've also been doing a lot of work with the World Green Building Council, the UK Green Building Council, and other groups in the UK, such as LETI and so forth. So there's quite a lot of kind of sort of getting absolutely clear about what we mean by net zero, because I think everybody's got a slightly different understanding of that. And hopefully we're going to get this one voice, one definition in the UK, and then we then really sort of, as part of this kind of discussion, is taking this around the world. So I've presented the 2030 challenge to Australia, New Zealand, our colleagues at the Commonwealth Association of Architects, and also to the AIA as well. And the AIA are updating their 2030 commitment to align with our RIBA challenge as well. So the key definition of this is actually if you have a small house in a sort of suburban or rural area with access to sort of a good, say 2 stories, then you've got enough roof area to install PVs, which combine with a very highly insulated, airtight, efficient construction, then in most climates, you can achieve net zero on site. And that is even in the north of Britain, where I'm speaking to you just now, is that the sun is very weak here, but we can still do it with that principle. So that's fine. That's if you can do that, that's what we're really encouraging everybody to do. But as soon as you get above 2 to 3 stories, then you don't have enough roof area to then balance that calculation. So therefore, you've got to then sort of find other ways to do it. And I think this is the thing where we're going to be absolutely clear, very pragmatic. We can't achieve net zero on site for everything. And if we try and do that, then we actually sort of create a problem of our own making. I think it's almost impossible to do that. And it actually sort of provides an unbalanced approach. And we've got to consider holistic measures as well as embodied carbon and things like that. So what we're saying in terms of the UK and in terms of all our principles, we're taking it to government as well, is if you can achieve a 75% reduction based on current benchmarks, and it's all linked to benchmarks in terms of how buildings are worked in reality, then you're doing well. And I think at that point, then we say, okay, I think you've done well, and therefore the next 25%, then you're allowed to offset. Now, the next question comes in is basically, there's some offsetting schemes around the world that are really not fit for purpose. And so we need to kind of agree in terms of a gold standard of certification. And for us, it is basically, it's either investing in decarbonising your local grid. So it's buying wind turbines, it's buying PVs, which then you own the carbon credits. That's the first thing. The second thing is carbon sequestration. It's actually planting forest, and I think we're encouraging all our kind of clients to really plant as much forest. And this goes throughout the world. There's a 1 trillion tree challenge on at the moment, so I'd really encourage everybody to sign up to that and really plant trees, and that is the future. That will help. 1 trillion trees, they estimate, will balance about 20 to 25% of our global carbon emissions. So that's the first thing, and obviously the benefits of that come through there. So if we do things like that, I think that's absolutely sensible, and it's about that balance of decarbonising the grid, adding to the future of our forestry, and we're cutting down the size of UK every year in terms of forest. So we've got to rebalance out. We've got to plant the size of UK every year. That's what we should do collectively.
And indeed, I think there's so much, you've mentioned some of there that people can do individually. And indeed, again, I think sometimes that people look quite cynically on, you're planting trees. But actually, it is so important because so many have been taken out. I have a question here also in terms of rainwater and, how might the rainwater capture? Is there a danger that might disrupt the water cycle and the health of streams and rivers in countries?
Okay, so I think this is where it's the principle is there in terms of a sustainable water cycle, but depending where you are in the world, that might mean different things. So for most of the UK, unfortunately, there's the increase in flooding because of climate change. We're going to get more rain, unfortunately, and that is causing an amazing impact. And we can see the floods right around Europe and also in the States and things like that. So unfortunately, this is it. If you're prone to a rainy area, it's going to get worse. So therefore, what we're trying to say is actually in the UK is if every building stores almost a seasonal worth of rain, and we're talking 3 months here, then that will help to sort of take the pressure off our infrastructure. So it's kind of balancing point, and then we can use that to then offset potable water use as well. So you've got a win-win. But when you're in sort of areas with little rain, and actually the southeast of England, Cambridgeshire, we're doing a scheme in Cambridge just now, and actually the converse is true. They are in drought, and they've been technically in drought for many years now. And what happened there is their groundwater is actually going down. There's very little of it. So actually the sustainable water cycle there, and actually that's what we're saying to the client, is actually not to store it in rainwater in terms of buildings, but actually to help to put it back into the aquifer under Cambridge and create fenland. The two things actually then we're replenishing the aquifer, which then is a natural kind of sort of recycle of water, potable water use, and then you can use that for forever. And at the same time, fenland is actually got a greater carbon sequestration than forest, so that locks in carbon. So I think it depends where you are, and obviously the Middle East, then it's all about seasonal storage.
Yes, indeed. And I mean, we do get a little bit of flooding here every now and then, but again, that's possibly also due to design in terms of drainage and correct drainage in terms of like the motorways, the buildings, all of that. So it really, it's about the holistic approach to actually making sure that when you're starting from, I guess, the blank canvas, so to speak, these are the type of things that really now, and particularly on new builds, can and have to be taken care of and taken into consideration.
I think it's about resilience as well. So if you've got, it's just that thing where if you've got some local storage on your building, and we're talking about batteries as well in terms of PVs, if there's a big event that happens, and big events are going to happen in the future, if the infrastructure goes down, you're left actually in a bit of a quandary. So if you've got some local storage just to tide you over for, you know, sort of that sort of period, then that all is good. So I think that's the way we need to go, a decentralized plus helping the infrastructure.
Now, when we look at qualifications, and this is rather new to when we think about what you were talking about, the Masters in Sustainable Architecture and things like that, you know, obviously a lot of these qualifications are new, but people need to get used to them. How do we make sure that they're rolled out and that they're acceptable everywhere, perhaps? And, you know, is there going to be, you think, a global qualification? Or, I mean, I suppose there's not a global qualification in any one area, it's often regional, but what can we do to make it more acceptable?
So I think this is where there's another work stream that my team, I chair obviously the Sustainable Futures Group at the RIBA, and we've got a body working on some doing fantastic work on creating a global sustainable curriculum for architects and for the entire construction industry. So we've got a working group, 250 different bodies and individuals have contributed to that work. So we created the curriculum, and then we're going to be starting rolling out CPDs. And this is a massive, this isn't just one organization, this is beyond the RIBA. This is actually every professional body should be part of this in terms of the UK. So, and then they're going to be free to use. So we're really trying to encourage, we've got the structure, we've got the definitions, we've got the protocols for everything we've just been talked about in terms of the outcomes, and we need to sort of have an open source CPD for everybody to actually get upskilled as fast as possible.
Yes,
10 years.
definitely. Yeah, indeed. I think that's what everybody is crying out for, because there is certainly a move in this direction. Gary Clark, I want to thank you for taking the time. We're out of time here, but it was great to have that time to actually ask you a few more questions after that. Principal and Regional Leader of Science and Technology with HOC, with the RIBA Sustainable Futures, the University of Queen's. You've got all sorts of stuff going on, and it's great to see someone like you so active. And again, we'll look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks very much.